chair of the history department, and I'm on the executive committee of the Institute for Liberal Arts. The Institute for Liberal Arts is an embryonic project that's just been started at Swarthmore, and one of its missions over the last couple of years is to enable conversations, initiatives, ideas that couldn't happen inside kind of the ordinary bounds of discipline, and to listen to what people bring to us and to see if we can't help make it happen. So the Critical Reflections on Community series that's happening this year is also a project that the Institute has sponsored. Last year, we sponsored some symposia on Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, and these are all kind of models for us. We don't, and sometimes members of our community don't, always like everything about the things that people bring to us. I didn't particularly care for the Jonathan Haidt book last year, but it was an interesting conversation, and that's what we're hoping for. I think we're going to get it today. Let me just quickly say a few things about process, and then I'll introduce our two guests. We're here in the meeting house, and this is a space devoted to speech. And in this space, people speak as the Spirit moves them. But it's also a space where I think no one who's part of the religious community that meets in here would think to silence someone else. So I'm hoping we'll follow that spirit too today. And I hope you'll be mindful of how many people are here and who are here to hear and to listen and to speak, and keep that in mind as you go along. The one thing that we're going to do that departs a little bit from the way that the congregation works in this space is that our distinguished speakers will recognize from here to the floor. So they'll be looking for your hands up and they'll call out, and we'll go from there. So let me introduce our guests. I'll start with Robert P. George, the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. He spent last year as a visiting professor at Harvard Law School. He is chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and has previously served on the President's Council on Bioethics and as a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. He is a former judicial fellow at the Supreme Court of the United States, where he received the Justice Tom Clark Award. Professor George is the author of many books, including In Defense of Natural Law, The Clash of Orthodoxies, and Conscience and Its Enemies. His articles have appeared in the Harvard Law Review, the Yale Law Journal, the Review of Politics, the Review of Metaphysics and Law and Philosophy. He is the recipient of the United States Presidential Citizens Award and the Honorific Medal for the Defense of Human Rights of the Republic of Poland. Among his other honors are the Canterbury Medal for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberties, the Sidney Hook Memorial Award of the National Association of Scholars, the Philip Merrill Award of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. He gave the 2007 John Dewey Lecture in Philosophy and of Law at Harvard, the 2008 Judge Guido Calabresi Lecture in Law and Religion at Yale, and the 2008 Sir Malcolm Knox Lecture in Philosophy at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Professor George is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Swarthmore and holds degrees in law and theology from Harvard and a doctorate in philosophy of law from Oxford. He has received honorary doctorates of law, letters, ethics, science, divinity, humane letters, civil law, and juridical science. He is an accomplished bluegrass banjo player and fingerstyle guitarist, and I have it on good repute from a number of people. It's pretty amazing to hear, and led the country and bluegrass band Robbie George and Friends when he was at Swarthmore. Cornel West is Professor of Philosophy and Christian Practice at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He was also the class of 1943 Professor of African American Studies Emeritus at Princeton University and was formerly a university professor at Harvard. He has also taught at Yale University and the University of Paris. He is the author of such books. That's always when you know an academic's written a lot, is when it's such books. The American Invasion of Philosophy, A Genealogy of Pragmatism, The Ethical Dimensions of Marxist Thought, Race Matters, and Democracy Matters. Professor West is well known as an anti-poverty and pro-justice and democracy activist, as well as a scholar and public intellectual. He is honorary chairman of the Democratic Socialists of America and a founder of the Network of Spiritual Progressives. He co-chaired the National Parenting Organization's Task Force on Parent Empowerment and participated in President Clinton's national conversation on race. He was graduated magna cum laude from Harvard College, where he majored in Near Eastern Studies and earned his bachelor degree in 3 years. In 1980, he became the first African American to earn a PhD in philosophy from Princeton. He has received numerous fellowships, prizes, and honors, including more than 20 honorary degrees. Professor West is a frequent media commentator. He's appeared on networks ranging from MSNBC and PBS to CNN and Fox News. He often appears on programs such as Real Time with Bill Maher, The Colbert Report, and Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson. He has also been featured in several documentaries, and I was going to mention this if it didn't mention it in his official biography, but it does. He's made appearances in Hollywood films, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolution. He is also a performing artist, having made several spoken word and hip-hop albums and been named MTV's Artist of the Week for his work. He has worked with artists such as Prince, Bootsy Collins, and the late Gerald Levert. Professor West has published a widely noted memoir entitled Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. Please welcome both our guests. Please recognize from the floor hands, and we'll see what we get to.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. And Cornel and I would like to say a special thanks, Rebecca, to you. We're delighted to have the opportunity to be here, and thank you for your kind hospitality and your leadership of the college. As you kindly mentioned, I'm an alumnus of the college. Cornel is even better than an alumnus, a true friend of the college and of everything the college stands for. We'd also like to thank Ed Rowe. I don't know, Ed, where are you? Yeah, there you go. Ed has been just wonderful at organizing things, especially when everything went wrong a week ago. And an ice storm prevented us from having the first of what were meant to be 2 meetings. Ed was a stalwart, kept everything under control, kept us home, and got us here for today. And I personally want to thank my beloved friend, Professor West, for joining me again for an occasion like this. We've taught at Princeton on several occasions. We'll be doing that again next year, about this time in the spring of next year. We've also taken our show on the road around the country. It's just a delight to travel with Professor West. I've learned to be a photographer. I take lots of pictures with cameras that are handed to me from people who want to photograph with the star of the Matrix. But I know that occasionally we're depicted as being an odd couple. I suppose that's because he's tall and I'm short, but for some reason they depict us as an odd couple. But we're not. We're united to each other in love, in true fraternal affection. When I call Brother Cornel, I mean he's my brother, Cornel. And above all, in a devotion to the cause of liberal learning. It was that brought us together. It was teaching together. Great texts from Sophocles to Plato, St. Augustine, Machiavelli, Hayek, Marx, Dewey, C.S. Lewis, Martin Buber. It was that experience of pursuing understanding, pursuing knowledge, pursuing truth together that was the bond that united us. And so despite the well-known differences of height between the two of us, there is a powerful bond that unites us, and it's for the sake of that bond that we're here today. We take our cue, really, from the speech that President Chop gave, and which I know some of you have read, because Professor West and I asked some of the students to read it for today, called Against the Grain. And it really explores what the meaning is of liberal arts education in the 21st century. Way too often people claim that this, that, or the other institution or thing or value is in crisis. So I don't want to pile on to that. But I can't help but say that liberal arts education is in crisis today. It's in crisis because pressures are bearing on it from multiple sources. Obviously, some of those pressures are financial. The enterprise of liberal arts education is expensive. And there's not an obvious way, a direct way, in which liberal arts education pays off in dollars and cents immediately for anyone. So who's going to pay for it? Are alumni donors, are foundations, are governments, are people generally going to be willing to invest the money in our young people to give that portion who desire it, and are qualified intellectually to take it on, the great gift of a liberal arts education? But I would suggest that's actually the smaller crisis. The larger crisis, which President Schott puts her finger on, is an identity crisis. What does a liberal arts education mean? What's the point of the enterprise? What is it that we're doing? What is it that we're about? What is it that justifies the time and effort and money that goes into it? What's the goal, in other words? Is the goal an instrumental goal? Is it to equip people for the workforce in the age of Google and Microsoft and the great trading houses of New York and so forth? Is that what it's about? Someone could make that argument. Someone could say, yeah, liberal arts education doesn't seem to be instrumental, of any instrumental value. I mean, reading Plato, reading Dante, reading Shakespeare, studying molecular biology just for its own sake, those don't seem to be of much instrumental value. But if you talk to employers in a range of fields, from the high-tech world to the financial world and everywhere else, they will, of course, tell you, we want liberal arts graduates because they know how to think. But I would suggest to you that even that is not the point. It's a good thing. We welcome it. And I know you who are students here look forward to actually having jobs. Sure. Nothing wrong with that. No need to apologize for that. But I'd suggest that the real goal is the deepening of the person, the deepening of the subject, the deepening of the student, the enrichment of the intellect and the heart of the person who is the fortunate beneficiary of an education like the education that has historically been offered at Swarthmore. But do we really want it? Do we really believe, do we have the old faith that a liberal arts education actually is enriching? Is it worth spending time with Plato, or Shakespeare, or Jane Austen, or contemporary 20th century thinkers and writers, 21st century thinkers and writers, when you could be spending your time on technical, professional, instrumental subjects? Do we really believe that there's an intrinsic value to knowledge and to the pursuit of knowledge that justifies our doing what we are doing? President Schott has put on the table for us 3 principles that she regards as integral to liberal arts education. And I agree, and I hope that our discussion here today will help to deepen our understanding and appreciation of these principles, if indeed they are, as I believe, sound. The first of those is the principle of critical thinking. Now, by critical thinking, surely we don't mean sheer, raw, 93-octane analytical ability. Yeah, that's an important component of critical thinking, but it's got to be more than that. And so the president asks us to think about ways to expand our understanding of critical thinking. And if we do that, I think we'll naturally be led to the virtue of self-critical thinking. That is, the practice supported by the virtue of intellectual humility that enables us to consider at every moment the possibility that what we thought was the case what we believed was the case, what we perhaps hoped to be the case, and what we had wrapped our own emotions around, hoping it to be the case, is in fact false, is in fact incorrect, is in fact not the case. Being open to the possibility that we're wrong and that we need to revise our view. Under the pressure of reasoning, thinking, considering, arguing. And the arguments might or might not be in discursive form. Professor West in our sessions today with individual students rightly stressed that while discursive, philosophical type analytical argument is an important component in the truth-seeking enterprise, there are other complementary ways, non-discursive forms of seeking in music and in the arts and in literature of the sort that we explore, but not necessarily with the tools of analytic philosophy. But the premise of the enterprise is the possibility that we could move from error to truth, or nearer to truth. The possibility that we can change to affirm what we formerly didn't affirm, or deny what we formerly affirmed, taking into account the sheer vulnerability that's presupposed by that prospect. And that's because we human beings are not simply minds, not simply centers of rationality. We have feelings. We have emotions. We have what David Hume famously called passions. And some of our feelings and emotions and passions attach to the convictions and beliefs and values that we hold. We get deeply attached to them, and most of the time that's really good. Who would want to be a person who was completely dispassionate about his or her beliefs? And yet, when we enter the liberal arts enterprise in its dimension of critical thinking and therefore of self-criticism, we are boarding a train not knowing the destination to which we're headed. We may come board the train believing one thing passionately, powerfully, emotionally attached to it, knowing that we might leave the train thinking something very different. We might board the train as one kind of person with one kind of self-understanding and leave the train as a person quite unlike anything we would have wished to be like when we boarded the train. That vulnerability, rooted in intellectual humility, a sense of one's own fallibility, is vital to the self-critical component of liberal arts education, of the sort Swarthmore has historically provided for and witnessed to. Then President Chopp raises a second dimension, the development of moral character. She adds to that civic responsibility. Now that's a theme that you have heard, both of those themes, if we can separate them. Both of those are themes that you've heard all the time, right? Haven't you been told that a liberal arts education is for the sake of development of character and civic responsibility? And I agree with President Chopp that that is true. That's got to be added to the mix. It's not just critical thinking. But then don't we realize immediately attention? And for this reason, if we're truly open to the possibility that we're wrong about this, that, or the other important thing, what view about morality, what sense of moral character do we try to achieve? If the college is to shape moral character, doesn't it have to have a view of what moral character is? But that's up for grabs. What's right and wrong is notoriously controversial in our society. And if we're doing our job, it's going to be controversial in any center of liberal learning. And it's going to be subject to internal self-criticism by each and every individual. So how does the college square its obligation and commitment to critical thinking and self-criticism with its obligation and commitment to character formation? And a fortiori to civic responsibility. Since, again, notoriously, we disagree about what is right and wrong in the civic sphere. There is no consensus, and none of us has been given the charism of infallibility so that we know for sure. All we can do is our best, engaging with others, engaging with people who disagree with us, engaging with people who see things differently. We've had different experiences. We've reached different judgments. Engage with them in the enterprise of trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, what the right policies for our civil society and our civic order actually are. And then, of course, the third dimension that the president puts her finger on is the responsibility to make the world better. Not to treat our liberal arts education as just a private possession, enriching me and making me better off, but to take the treasures out into the larger society and make a difference. But here again, and quite obviously, we don't agree on which direction we should take the larger society. Now, yes, on some things we do agree. On some things we have a broad consensus. In the intellectual world, undoubtedly here at Swarthmore, in the broader society. But there are many things on which we don't agree. What's actually for the better and what's for the worse. And on some things we agree about the ends that we want to achieve. All of us want to fight poverty, for example. Professor West has given his life to bearing witness to that struggle, participating in that struggle. And yet with the best faith, the best will, the best efforts at understanding in the world, we can and do disagree about the proper means for fighting poverty. What will, in reality, alleviate the plight of those most disadvantaged, and what might make it actually worse. How to square our efforts in one domain, say the alleviation of poverty, with efforts in another domain, where there may be some trade-offs that are required. So somehow through this whole difficult combination of principles and values, we have to carry on the enterprise of liberal arts learning. There's not a recipe. There's not a way to check the boxes and get it right. All we can do is our best to practice the virtues that make liberal arts education possible. Intellectual honesty, humility, integrity, courage, where one might find it necessary to speak up for a cause that's unpopular, mutual respect, even in dealing with people you think are profoundly wrong. All of that we have to do while knowing all along, every step of the way, we might be getting it very, very wrong. We might be getting it very, very wrong. Let me just turn, before handing the microphone over to Professor West, to one other great figure, along with Rebecca Chopp, in reflection on liberal learning, the 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill. Some of our students today who met with us in small groups were asked to read Mills on Liberty, or a chapter of Mills on Liberty, his famous essay on liberty, and we had a great discussion based on that. Mill, in the chapter that we assigned, which is about freedom of thought and expression, freedom of thought and discussion, he actually calls it. Mill says that the real value of freedom of thought and freedom of expression, freedom of speech, we might say, the real value is not in freedom of thought or speech itself as an abstract right. In fact, in the first chapter, which we didn't have the students read, but some of you in your philosophy or political theory classes have read, In the first chapter, Mill says, I forego any advantage to my argument for freedom generally, including freedom of speech, from appeal to abstract right as a thing independent of utility. He says, utility, for me, is the final arbiter on all moral questions, but it must be utility in the broadest sense, the largest sense, centered on the concept of man as a progressive being. What Mill is saying there, whether you accept his particular view of value, his utilitarian view of value or not, I happen not to, you might. Whether or not we accept his particular conception of it, his point to me is a powerful and sound one. The purpose of the freedom is to advance the flourishing, the well-being, the fulfillment of human beings in the communities that we form. And so Mill observes that in any engagement with an interlocutor, in a classroom, in a forum like this one, in the public square, in circumstances of mutual respect and goodwill, there are three possibilities. One is wrong and one's interlocutor is right. That's the first possibility. In that case, by being willing to engage, not just to listen or tolerate the other guy speak, but to be willing to listen with an open mind, willing to engage in a serious way, willing to consider the possibility that the other guy's right and I'm wrong. Well, obviously, if it turns out, if it is the fact that the other person is right and you're wrong, you have been benefited enormously by that person's successful argument moving you from error to truth, from misunderstanding to full understanding, or proper understanding, or more nearly at least, proper, complete, or full understanding. The gift that your interlocutor gives you is the possibility of getting it right when you've been getting it wrong, however confident you might have been that you had it. Possibility number two. Your interlocutor is partially right and partially wrong. And you're partially right and partially wrong. In this case, the possibility is there of both of you bringing each other to a fuller, richer, more complete understanding of whatever the subject matter is of the discussion. It might be something relatively unimportant, but nevertheless worth arguing about. It may be of supreme importance. Profound question of religion, religious truth, or morality, or politics, or justice. The great questions of the sort that were debated by Plato and his interlocutors, thought about and reflected on by the great thinkers and teachers of mankind. And then there's the third possibility. This is, to me, the most interesting one of all. Mill argues that there is a great benefit on offer from engagement, serious intellectual free engagement, even if you are completely right and the other guy's wrong. And here's why he says that. Truth for human beings, knowledge, understanding. If you don't like the T word for truth, substitute knowledge, understanding, is not purely notional. It's not just the assent to a proposition. It's not getting it right like checking the right box on the SAT exam on a question. The truths that really matter existentially for the living of a human life, for the living in community, are more than just propositions to be affirmed. They are realities to be entered into, to be understood more deeply, to be, if I can use this word, appropriated. When you understand that truth, knowledge, understanding is not merely notional, but to be appropriated, you realize that even if I can check all the right boxes and get the 800 on the SAT, that's only the beginning of understanding. And by engaging with a serious, even if misguided, interlocutor, I can deepen my understanding, making it more than merely notional. Yes, God exists, or no, God doesn't exist. But deep, understanding what it means that God exists, or what it means that God doesn't exist. Understanding what it entails for my life, my relationship with others, my obligations in the community, to stand with Maimonides, let's say, on one side, or Nietzsche on the other. Looked at in that way, just to use this, stay with my example of the God Code, and you don't have to talk, we can talk about lots of other things that are important, but just to stay with the example of the God Code. What that shows is, the question is not just one that you can address by checking the box yea or nay, yes or no, God or no God. God exists, God doesn't exist. Either way, there's a profound meaning to God's existence or non-existence that is a depth to be explored, a depth to be plunged into. There's an enrichment to be had. It's available to one by entering into the reality more and more deeply. But it's a risky business. It comes at a cost. We really do get attached to our beliefs. If one is a theist, if one is a Christian or Muslim or Jew, a believer, one will identify with one's convictions. One will wrap one's emotions around them, one's feelings. One will be a member of a certain community, have certain valuable relationships as a result of that. There will be certain practices that order and structure one's life. But being open to the possibility of being wrong means it could all go up in smoke. You're making yourself vulnerable to the truth being, as best you see it, profoundly uncomfortable, profoundly discomforting, profoundly jarring, leaving one potentially friendless and hopeless. That's what an openness to the actual liberal arts enterprise means. Because you might not come down on full reflection in some party or another, on one side of an ideological or religious divide or another. You might be in some ways a liberal, in some ways a conservative, in some ways a socialist, in some ways a capitalist. And you might not fit. You might not fit with people who are like me, or I thought were like me, or who were like me, before the transformation that might have been worked in my life by the openness to serious engagement with ideas. So as Professor West pointed out in one of the seminars today, to actually be willing to do the liberal arts thing, to be willing takes enormous courage. It takes the courage to face the possibility of not recognizing yourself when the process is done with you, of being friendless and homeless. There's a risk to a liberal arts education. So what do you owe? What do you owe this liberal arts college for the education you're given? Well, it seems to me that one of the things you owe is the beneficiary of this privilege, and it is a privilege. Most people don't have it. Most people who would love to have it don't have it. People often say, well, you have an obligation to give back, and I agree with that. You have an obligation to make the world better. Rebecca was right about that. You have an obligation to be a good citizen, a civically responsible person. I agree with that. But my own answer to that question would be probably an unorthodox one. Your responsibility is to be willing to demonstrate the courage to make yourself vulnerable to being a person that you would not recognize. Over to you, brother.
Great stuff, everybody. I am blessed to be here. And it's always a delight to be with my dear brother, Robbie George. I have great love and respect for my brother. We have deep disagreements. We've got a number of agreements. And we love to engage in dialogue. Committed to the life of mind, committed to the world of ideas. I want to begin by saluting the students here at this grand institution. We have had magnificent conversations, the 3 sessions that we've had today. I walk away with very precious memories of the discussions that we've had on Plato's Apology, on Meals on Liberty, as well as a wonderful essay of my very dear sister President Rebecca Sharp. We go back decades with proper sex and liberation theology in 1986 and all of those contexts. And the leadership, and it matters in Colgate here at Swarthmore. To think the working class origins on the vanilla side of Kansas. Here you end up in this Quaker institution as leader and visionary that you are. I want to pay tribute to the faculty. What sits at the very center of the greatness of Swarthmore is the stellar faculty. I've been blessed to interact with the Alexander Nehemiahs, the great David Lewis, one of the few philosophical geniuses of the 20th century. Here, Brother Gil Horn, Brother Chuck. He went to Swarthmore too, didn't he? Guy in political theory at Princeton.
Chuck Bites, no, he taught here. He was my
That's
tutor.
right, that's right. He taught it. He talks about Swarthmore all the time. You would think he graduated. But, and I can go on and on, of course, Brother Robbie as well. And I want to thank my dear brother Ed Rowe for facilitating this gathering. I know for 150 years that this place has been around owing to the courage of our Quaker brothers and sisters. And holds it 1904, Woodrow Wilson, 1964, Johnson, who will speak June the 2nd, 2014. Will Barack Obama show up? Interesting question. Interesting question. I'll pray for you and him. But I want to make sure we have time for dialogue. So I want to begin by an epigraph from the great W.B. Du Bois. If anybody had an allegiance to liberal arts education, it was one of the great public intellectuals of the 20th century, the greatest black intellectual ever produced by my own tradition. I'm talking about a dignified yet terrorized, traumatized, and stigmatized people of black people. Du Bois was 89 years old when he embarked on the writing of a trilogy of novels about Manzar. 6 years earlier, he had been in the U.S. court with handcuffs, targeted, stigmatized as communists. Yet, of course, he was just in love with those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. And he said, I've been wrestling with 4 questions, and I think these 4 questions ought to have much to do with liberal arts education. The first question was, how does integrity face oppression? The second question was, how does honesty face deception? Third question, how does decency face insult? And that last query, what does virtue do in the face of brute force? Now, these queries are important for me because they echo line 38 of Plato's Apology. You understand that life is not worth living for the human. We know our English human derives from the Latin humano, which means burying and burial. It has to do with death, humility, humanity. Have to do with we're creatures on the way to bodily extinction. We're human beings on the way to death. That's why Plato would say over and over again, philosophy, love of wisdom, philosophia, the meditation on and preparation for death. Montaigne, the greatest of all of the early modern European philosophers, would write, to philosophize is to learn how to die. In Seneca, we don't expect too much profundity from the Romans. Involved in imperial expansion. Seneca's got something to say. He or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. We've told our students, and I've told my students for almost 35 years, every time you enter my classroom, you've come here to learn how to die. Because that's the only way you learn how to live. is to learn how to die. What do you mean, Brother West? That when you muster the courage to critically examine your assumptions, presuppositions, your prejudices, prejudgments, and decide to let some of them go, that's a form of death. So when the seniors march with dignity on June the 2nd, the fundamental question will be, to what extent did they learn how to die? Because if they critically examine their own assumptions, themselves, what's inside of them, what's been deposited inside of them by society, by history, they have undergone a process of what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, the formation of attention, the shift from paying attention to the surface and the superficial and the focus on depth and the substantial. The rejection of this instant gratification and fleeting pleasures and focus on genuine compassion and enduring joys. That turning of the soul that Plato talks about as a form of paideia. How do we engage in this transformation that connects the formation of attention to the cultivation of a critical, compassionate self and the maturation of a soul? And by soul, I'm not just talking about some entity. I'm talking about all that goes into whatever forms of integrity, decency, honesty, and virtue constituting who you are. And so paideia, liberal arts education, echoes of Du Bois, echoes of Socrates, Plato's Socrates at least, as well as Montaigne and Seneca, has to do with keeping track of the forms of death connected to the varieties of dogmatism and structures of domination. Now, I have my own philosophical anthropology. I believe that we are the kind of beings, featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious beings born between urine and feces, whose body will one day be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. On our way from womb to tomb, doesn't last that long. What kind of human beings will we choose to be? What kind of courage will we muster critically to examine whatever assumptions and presuppositions and prejudices that we have? And the history of Swarthmore is precisely one in which you say, lo and behold, in such a barbaric and bestial and brutal world of long histories of imperial subjugation, white supremacist targeting, patriarchal and homophobic stigmatizing, and subordinating of working peoples, somehow we can be flickering candles in the darkness against the backdrop of such historic forms of catastrophe and crisis, and say, we can learn how to die in order to learn how to live by wrestling with forms of death so that we can be what? Reborn. There is no rebirth without death. There's no maturation without wrestling with the forms of death. There's no growth, there's no development without critically engaging and letting loose assumptions and presuppositions that become forms of death in order to live. And that's why anytime you talk about liberal arts education, we never want to engage in any kind of deodorized, sanitized, or sterilized discourse. Humanities, thank God, Swarthmore has a deep commitment to humanities, because anytime you hear humanities, you're talking about commando. We always remind our professors of humanity. Oh, you're the ones into that death stuff, huh? Oh, you want to teach us how to die, and you want to deal with forms of death. Social death like slavery. Psychic death that women have to deal with given vicious patriarchal attack. Spiritual death, when you're told you have no future. So many of our Jewish brothers and sisters in Jew-hating Europe for so long, 2,000 years. Or even some of our Palestinian brothers under Israeli occupation. We love both our precious Jewish and our precious Palestinians. They're part of the Humando Project. Or our gay brothers and lesbian sisters, humanity affirmed. And yet have to also acknowledge they're human too, which means what? They can even be wrong sometimes. but the humanity never to be questioned. Black folk, brown folk, red folk, whatever. That's what makes it both so serious, but also so joyful. Now notice, I try to stay away from the word of pleasure, because we live in such a market-driven society. The rule of money and big money, everything for sale, everybody for sale. The market calculation sitting at the center, the financializing, privatizing, militarizing of the whole world. What kind of non-market values can survive and thrive in such a world? Here's Swarthmore sitting there, like almost an oasis, with all of these market forces coming at him. Commodification, rationalization. Students coming in, well, I wish I had time for the humanities, but I'm pretty professional. How come? Because mom and dad told me. Sacrifice all these years, you better come out there with a steel. He said, oh no, that's schooling. I come to Swarthmore to be educated. There's a qualitative difference between education and schooling. I'm not against schooling. You need a skill. Go get it. But these 4 years, you're learning how to die critically involved in the way in which Brother Robbie was talking about it. Fallible, finite, always acknowledging you might be wrong. No one has any presumption of infallibility that has any credibility whatsoever. And yet also acknowledging, Samuel Beckett used to say it so well, his last piece of prose fiction, worst word hope. That's Brother Sam. Try again, fail better. Try again, fail better. Why? Because the history of the human drama is one in which what it seems to be a cycle of domination, dogmatism, and forms of death, with these flickering candles in the face of dogmatism. Conversation, and not just conversation but discourse, but in theater. Thank God for the Tennessee Williams and August Wilson, the Lorraine Hansberrys, Arthur Millers, so we get sound and body along with just discourse. Or music, central. What better example do we have of paideia, the spirituality of Socratic questioning with the spirituality of genuine loving and compassion? Better represented in John Coltrane, A Love Supreme. The courage to question and the courage to love. The best of the legacy of Athens. Know thyself. Question. And the legacy of Jerusalem. Our Jewish brothers and sisters. The Hesed. Toward widow, stranger. Christians, the least of these. Our Muslim brothers and sisters. The mercy for all across the board. And then our precious secular atheists and agnostics. We talk about love, compassion, some elective affinities with the earlier religious discourses, but they are not to be subsumed under it. Chekhov has more love in him than most Christian churches I know. And he was agnostic and was a medical doctor. Even though he comes out of Russian Orthodox tradition, he's got the Christian compassion without the Christian consolation. Still my dear brother. But I say that because when we're talking about liberal arts education, we're talking about issues of life and death and joy and sorrow and agony and anguish and catastrophe and heartache and heartbreak, but also of determination and fortitude. A hermeneutical humility. We all come with our own baggage. Gadamer is right. Truth of matter. Our hermeneutical baggage. Some of us have dogmas, we put it under the fire, and we hold on to it. I'm still a Christian. How could you be a Christian after reading Nietzsche? Nietzsche's wrong. But but he is as profound as they come. And the same is true, one hopes, in our own ways, arriving where we choose to decide in light of the hermeneutical humility and the intellectual integrity, the moral consistency, what the great Jane Austen called constancy. I love that word. Constancy. Not concerned about just you and the tribe, or your clan, or your race or nation, but humando across the board. And then political tenacity, being willing to be unpopular. That line 24a, Plato's Apology, Socrates said, the cause of my unpopularity was what? Parrhesia, plain speech, frank speech, unintimidated speech, honest speech, which always gets you in trouble. People ask me over and over again, why do you spend so much time with Brother Robert George? He's such a conservative. You claim to be so leftist. Appreciate the question. Because we got plain speech, whether you agree or not. He lets you know where he stands. And you contest him, go at him. He'll come back. Now, you got some comeback. Go at him. But that's very important. That's very important because it means then you don't have to worry about the mendacity and hypocrisy that oftentimes circulates in the name of discourse. You have to have sincerity. Malcolm X used to say what? Sincerity is my credential. Doesn't mean he's right, but you always knew where he stood. It's a sign of integrity. That's what I love about this brother. Might be wrong, not all the time, but sometimes, but you got sincerity. And I try to be sincere too. How come? Because when they put me in the coffin, I don't want people to be unclear about where I stood, what I was trying to do. It has everything to do with what this paideia is all about. You're not here that long. What kind of legacy will you leave? And will you be able to bring together the sharpness of your critical analysis with the warmth of your heart and the courage in your soul? And most importantly, and I want to end on this because I believe quite deeply in piety, the way great Rabbi Abraham Heschel characterized piety. Remembrance, reverence for something bigger than you, and resistance to being nonconformist. I'm pietistic in that sense. So the memory, your afterlife, given the life you tried to live, will be one that tries to ricochet through space and time, not because you're so big and bad, but because your witness had a quality that Du Bois talked about: integrity, decency, honesty, and a sense of virtue, even though you failed better. You still ended up doing things you didn't want to do. You still fell on your face, but you tried to bounce back. But let's stop there, and then we can open up.
Well, like us, you are in the middle of the project, in the middle of the liberal arts project. Some of you obviously are students, learning to be lifelong learners, lifelong liberal arts students. Others are on the faculty, as we are at our institutions. So you are wrestling, as we are wrestling, with what it means to do this, what the point of a liberal arts education is. What's the point of devoting one's life to teaching in an institution like this? What's the point in doing the work, if it's still the old Swarthmore, it's an awful lot of work, to make it through a place as demanding as this. So what we like to do now is open the floor and ask you in particular to share with us and engage with us on what you are wrestling with about the nature of this enterprise. What you think you're doing, what you're worried about when it comes to liberal arts education, Your doubts, if you have any, about whether it's actually worth it? What's the point? What's the objective? So let's open it. We just asked you to stand so we can see you because we're down pretty low here. And if you could give us your name and if you're a student, what you're studying, or faculty member, what you teach. Yeah, yeah, could you?
So I'm Jacob Aidenbaum. I'm a student. I'm studying math and economics here at Swarthmore. I'm a senior. And so I actually have two sort of separate questions, one for you and one for Professor West. My question to you is, you talk a lot about about recognizing that you're wrong. Right? And so on issues such as gay marriage, the way that we treat queer people in our society, what would it take for you to realize that you're wrong and admit it? And my question to you, Professor West, is you talk a lot about the humanities and the study of the humanities as a project that's dedicated to the self. And so I have to ask, isn't it selfish of you? Isn't it deeply, deeply selfish of you to go on tour with Robert George, to go on tour with a man who has spent so much of his life, so much of his professional career dedicated to denying the rights of others in pursuit of some academic project? Don't you through this discourse legitimize him, give him a platform from which to spew what I think is really quite hateful? For the National Organization for Marriage, an organization of which he was the founding chairman, is currently in the middle of a campaign to deny transgender children the right to use the proper bathrooms. His organization, his work is doing enormous harm. And so isn't it selfish of you to prioritize your own learning over the harms that he does?
Well, the answer to your question to me is, you've got some support there, as the applause made clear. It should make you feel good. But who is your friend? The people who are backing you up and say, yeah, go get them, gotcha question. Put them on the spot, let them have it. Or is it the person who's saying, you know, you've got an awful lot of certainty about your conviction. Maybe you should stop and think about the possibility that you're wrong. When I was a sophomore here at Swarthmore, I had the lesson to be in a general introductory political theory course with Ken Sharp. Professor Sharp taught us Plato to Nita. And along the way, early on in the course, we read Plato's dialogue Gorgias. That dialogue, if you happen to know it, raises some of the questions that we're concerned with here today. What's the purpose of intellectual engagement? What's the point of argument? What's the point of mixing it up intellectually with an interlocutor? Do we talk for victory, prestige, status, applause, to feel good about being a person who has these views rather than those views? Or is it something else? Do we choose our convictions based on what gives us standing, leaves us unthreatened, gives us status? Do we choose them based on what our group or clan or class or tribe is? If we're defeated in an argument intellectually, should we be happy or sad? I came with a lot of views. A lot of views that probably are more similar to the ones you hold today than the ones I hold now. I was quite confident in my views. I liked the way I presented myself. I wanted to be a sophisticated person. I wanted to think and believe what sophisticated people believe. And I liked fitting in a lot. I liked fitting in with other people who were like-minded. You know that old Greek? He grabbed me by the lapels and he shook me. And he said, you haven't thought for a minute about why you believe what you believe. You've adopted beliefs because they came with the territory, because they belonged to the groups that you were comfortable with, because they were what you regarded sophisticated people as believing. So that required me to do something I had never done before, which is to rethink everything and ask myself the question, why do I believe what I believe? That in turn required me to do something else that I had never done before, which was consider the very best arguments for the competing positions on a whole range of issues, from religion to philosophy to ethics to politics. And when I did that, when I started reading things that I'd never read before, when I started engaging arguments that I simply waved away before, I found myself going to a different place. And so when it comes to arguments about marriage and sexual morality, positions on that, there I had to do some reading and considering, some thinking. I had to read Sanger and Reich, Kinsey, Marcuse. But I also had to read Plato and Xenophon and Musonius and Augustine and Aquinas and Kant and Anscombe and Gandhi. And I found myself in a very different place from the place where you find yourself. But I found myself there on the basis of thinking as hard as I could about some very difficult issues. Is it a comfortable place to be? No. I'd like the applause. I'd rather have the applause. But is it where I have to be if I'm to have any integrity? Yeah, it is. Because I have read Sanger and Reich and Kinsey. And I have read Plato and Augustine and Gandhi. And I find myself on the side of Plato and Augustine and Gandhi, not on the side of Sanger and Reich and Kinsey. That's where I am. And what I would ask you to do is simply to consider those authors and any others who might cause you to at least consider, think about the possibility that you're in the wrong place. Who knows? I might be in the wrong place now. Maybe I need to go back and rethink. Maybe I need to read more stuff. Maybe there are things that you know, that you've read, that I should read. Maybe you've thought about these issues more deeply than I have. I've thought about them pretty deeply. And I really have considered the arguments on the other side. And I find myself where I find myself. Or not?
Oh, indeed. Well, I just appreciate your plain speech. What I don't appreciate, your brother, is why you would move so quickly to reduce my project to selfishness. See, that's a potential attack on my integrity. I don't appreciate it. And I'll tell you why. I'm saying this out of love, because we're probably going to be marching in the same demonstration together, defending the precious gay brother, living sister. I didn't know about the transgender children thing you talked about. But you see, I think anytime you approach another person that you don't even know that well, I think you want to begin with a charitable starting point as to what they're trying to do in their life. You know what I mean? And so I give you an example. You probably know I traveled the country with Carl Dix, right? Go to jail with Carl Dix. But Carl Dix is a revolutionary communist. He's a brilliant black man who's wrong on communism. Still thinks Mao made a contribution. He's just wrong. Stalin, and so forth and so on, and we talk about that. I say the same thing to Brother Carl Dix. We've been in jail many times together, as I say to my dear brother Robbie George. Disagreement, but I love Carl Dix's commitment to hitting New Jim Crow, hitting mass incarceration, fighting against the privatizing of public school, be it in Philadelphia or any other place where I spend time with him. Rabbi Michael Lerner, love my brother to death. He's a Zionist. I'm not a Zionist. I'm not a nationalist of any sort. But I work with progressive nationalists. He's a progressive Zionist. He's concerned about Israeli occupation and so forth. We travel on, we've written books together. I say the same thing to Michael Lerner that I say to my dear brother here. So that I tend to be a more jazz-like figure than you allow me to be. Because if, in fact, I'm trying to be flexible and fluid, not just dialogical, but polyphonic in allowing voices to be lifted where we do, in fact, overlap, then I've got a number of persons who I've traveled with throughout, not just the past year, but throughout my whole life. Now, if all of that's going to be reduced to just selfishness, then we both might as well go to the crack house and just say, yeah. I mean, good God Almighty. And I know you got your integrity. That's why I started off affirming you, because I know you got your integrity, and I like your moral passion. Very much so. But we know that learning how to live and learning how to die is not just moral passion, but it's also trying to approach someone in a context in which they're engaging in dialogue. So I'm not providing a platform for this brother at all, I don't think. You think I am? I don't think so. I'm engaging in dialogue so that many people who would come to see him and come to see me at the same time can be exposed to a variety of different perspectives on the issue. Now, the issue today is liberal arts education. You know, we're not focusing just on. Now, if we were having a debate on, Brother Robbie, what in the world is, what is the National Association of Marriage, is that the name of it? Organization. The National Organization of Marriage, and we're debating just that organization, then that's a whole different issue in terms of its policies and so forth and so on. But he's doing a whole lot of things. We were just in Washington, D.C. You're head of the Commission for Religious Liberties. We fighting for the religious liberties of Jews in Russia and the Baha'i in Iran and so forth. And we're working together on that. We come together, we agree. Those are very important things. And when we meet in that context, that's what we talk about. We don't talk about the National Organization of Marriage and so forth and so on. So that in that sense, here, yes, we're talking about liberal arts education. I'm convinced what he says about liberal arts education is very significant, independent of even the policies that you were talking about. And that's very important. That's what I mean by learning how to be charitable, even as you speak with that magnificent moral passion and that plain speech that you have. And of course, I'm just coming back at you in plain speech. You know what I mean? But I know I won't go on and on. But God bless you, brother.
Tell us your name and where you're, what you do.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Stiles. I'm a senior and my major is English literature. And I guess I had hopefully it's just no more than two comments. One was to kind of retort to Dr. West's your last point. It returns to your first point about sincerity. And I think it's very dangerous when we allow individuals to kind of separate their beliefs from their actions. And so, yes, when you might say that someone, you know, his views or his opinions on homophobia, on gay rights, those issues, those don't matter when we're dealing with the hardcore realities or some other topic. That's not the reality, and they are combined. And I think if you're going to treat someone as a sincere individual, like it's dangerous whenever you separate someone's ideas from their actions, because those ideas will always impact his, they'll impact my way that I view the solution to that problem. And so my second point to that is, like, this discussion is a privilege, and the reality is that whether it's any disadvantaged group, my particular focus might be with working class individuals and people of color. I recognize that is my focus because that has been the position that I come from, right? That a lot of that has to do with my own personal story. But there are so many people who do not have the luxury of merely discussing these issues. I feel like a lot of the problem is that we then don't have the correct perception on what those issues are, because either we're not living them day to day and we're not being forced to deal with the day-to-day realities of those people that are disadvantaged. And that those people that are disadvantaged, the reality is that their perceptions or their situations don't end up in these discussions and end up in the environment. So it's not a matter of, like, it's definitely a matter of having equal access, but that's not the case. And it's where you see theory never meeting reality. And so, for instance, with Swarthmore College, and like I'm in an honor seminar that's called the Urban Underclass, and we're talking about discussing and breaking down Moynihan's Culture of Poverty report. Where is the Culture of Wealth report? And why are we not, when we talk about these terms, there needs to be a redefining of what these terms are. I've done debate since middle school, and we all know that when you start around, we have to have equal terms, equal definitions, because otherwise we're not going to be on the same page. And if we don't agree on what justice is, if we don't agree on our conceptions of values, then we're never going to be able to come to the same conclusion. So unless we're redefining how we look at poverty and say, well, let's look at what is it that wealthy individuals, what is the problem with their perceptions, what is the problem with the way that they view capitalism and their values and how that impacts poverty, we're always going to be looking at what poor people do, or we're always going to be looking at what transgender individuals or those who are of different, they're not of the mainstream idea, we're always going to be looking to them for what is wrong. So I would call and demand for these larger institutions to look at how they can reframe the problem. Stop looking to those that are, quote unquote, not the norm, and what is it that they view to be so different, but what is it about the mainstream that has yet to be reevaluated? Because there is not equal access to the way that we can reevaluate those terms. Thank you.
Eloquent in terms of what Cicero and Quintilian meant. It was the deep wisdom speaking in what you said. But see, my hunch is that I know Sister Sharon teaches here in religion. She deals with these issues. I met Brother Phil. What's Brother Phil Jefferson? Run with the poverty program. He deals with these issues. That is to say, the kind of quality analysis in the brief amount of time you had that you laid out, I'm sure that's part and parcel of the conversation in those classes.
No.
And it's got to be, because they're not teaching classes on poverty, blaming poor folk.
But the issue
They're not doing that. I know
becomes
her from her work. You say what?
But and I don't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah.
the issue then becomes, and we kind of talked about this last year, is where you might have those platforms,
Yeah.
but if everyone's not even coming to that table, like, look at the majority of the percent of the people that watch the Colbert Report versus, I forget the guy's name, but the opposite one. People are only tuning in. People are only tuning into that which they already agree in. Like, a lot of people in my seminar, we're all talking to ourselves.
Well, no, I would disagree with that. I mean, I've taught in prison for 37 years. I'm teaching a course in Broadway right now. And you see, I don't believe that the Swarthmores and Yale and Princetons and so forth are just the privileged sites where discourse takes place. Discourse takes place a whole lot of different places. And when I'm teaching at Broadway, I'm not concerned with everybody coming to the table. We having a discussion about the new Jim Crow with those who are Jim Crows. Right? And then when I come to Swarthmore, it's a different kind of dialogue. It's a different kind of bubble, right? And all of these are bubbles in a certain sense because they're all contexts that have their own blindnesses. They have their own limitations. So that Swarthmore has this rich dialogue going on, but Swarthmore ain't a set of things. It's just one site among a whole set of different sites. And it's up for the students of Swarthmore to say, you know what? We know it is a privileged site, but we're going to be multi-sited. We're going to be in a lot of different sites. We're going to be in chocolate side of Philadelphia. We're going to be at the prison up at Haverford or whatever it is. And that's one of the ways in which the discourse becomes even more robust, more multi-voiced in that way. And it is not a question just of thinking that if it doesn't take place in Swarthmore, somehow we're just missing out on everything. No. It's a slice and a set of very rich, important voices. You see the point I'm trying to make? That is to say that I don't want you to in any way get discouraged if somehow everybody is not at the table and having equal access. America is structured by inequality, past and present. So there's not going to be equal access across the board. You got to work with what you got. And what you got are going to be courageous persons like yourself, courageous persons like this brother right here, who gets cantankerous. That's called Socratic tradition. Now, see, with Amos and Jesus, is a little more charitable, but still, it gets cantankerous to cut against the grain, but also you do want to respect those you're also engaging and respect the complexity of the situation and the subject matter. And I would suggest that, I don't know the curriculum, Ms. Swarthmore, but if I looked at that curriculum, I'm going to see some professors wrestling with issues of poverty and inequality in highly sophisticated ways. Is that true? Y'all got professors dealing with this? Or am I speaking in a vacuum? Am I just dead wrong about this? Well, say something, y'all. Say something, yeah. These professors breaking their necks and so forth and so on. They try to engage in some truth telling here. But of course, it's within whatever, the narrowness of whatever context the great Swarthmore is. But every institution has its own limitations. Nobody's logos. Nobody don't no salvific agency in that sense. We do what we can relative to what we have, but we do it better when we are pushed with cantankerous voices. But we also know that in the end, it's going to be folk far outside of Swarthmore. Swarthmore has a rich tradition of struggling against injustice, but in the end, if transformation of American society in the last 40 years was predicated just on folk at Swarthmore, we'd have been in world trouble. True. People on the ground who made the difference, put the pressure on, and the response was such. I'm sorry to go on and on, but these are two wonderful.
One of the tragedies of the human condition is that it's possible for reasonable people of goodwill not only to disagree, but to disagree about some very, very profound and important things. Professor West and I disagree about some important things. We agree on some important things as well. But he and I both disagree, perhaps even more profoundly, with my colleague Peter Singer, professor of philosophy at Princeton. I can't say Peter Singer's a bad man. I can't say he's a stupid man. He's anything but a stupid. I can't say he's an ill-informed man. On the subjects on which we so profoundly disagree, he's read as widely as I have. He's thought as deeply and carefully as I have. But he comes to a different conclusion. The world is complicated. Things are tough. We might like them to be simple, straightforward. We just see the truth. Wouldn't that be great if we just see the truth? That's just not reality. They're hard questions that have to be addressed in a challenging way, that challenge us to address them in a proper way. And to add to the tragedy, we have the strongest possible temptation to believe that if an issue is truly important, especially if it's truly important to me, then if somebody disagrees with me about that, that person is simply intolerable. Not allowed to disagree about that. That's the evidence that the person is a bad person. Someone who does not have a place in the dialogue. Now, as I say, this is the human condition. It's not the conservative position. It's not the progressive position or condition. It's the same everywhere. I speak to conservative audiences fairly frequently. You can just change the nouns. Leave everything else the same. The adjectives and adverbs and verbs the same. And there would be no difference between speaking to a liberal audience. Same thing, same issues in very many cases. The temptation to think that those people on the other side, they're the bad guys. They're the people who have wicked, malicious intent. We got to do something about them, or short of doing something about them, we certainly have to marginalize them and keep them out of the discussion. But I think anybody who does consider the sheer fact, as Mill says, of our human fallibility and the intellectual humility that is required of that will welcome, if you're me, not only a Cornel West, but a Peter Singer. If I were addressing together with Cornel, a conservative audience. And somebody said to me, "What are you doing associating with him?" I would say, hang on. This man is he's your best friend. He's going to do you the biggest favor anybody can do, anybody who aspires to intellectual credibility. He is going to challenge your most cherished assumptions. That's not your enemy. That's your friend. And he's your friend even if he's wrong. He might be right, but he's your friend even if he's wrong. By engaging with him, you will appropriate more fully, more deeply, the truth that you've already gotten at least a chunk out of.
I can't believe that the time is being passed. One more question. We did say this was going to end at 6, so we've got a couple of hands up.
Over here, don't know. Oh, Williams. Williams, okay.
My name is Zachary Worswood, and I have a question for Dr. Cornel West. First, I want to say, Dr. West, that I was deeply, deeply, profoundly inspired by your love, your commitment, and service to your father. And my question in particular is, given the political realities that you perceptively know to describe in your lectures of institutionalized graft, normalized corruption, normalized bribery, and so forth, how can you transgress and transcend the limitations that politicians in our political sphere today encounter? So how can you propose and enact legislation that will actually effectually address and reduce and alleviate poverty?
That's a tough question, brother, because we live in an empire and relatively quiet, not just militarily, but spiritually, in terms of the cultural, superficial spectacle, the obsession with money. The major message to young people these days is to be successful, defined in terms of material toys, spousing, and trophy spouses, and being well-adjusted to injustice, well-adapted to indifference. No democratic experiment, we have a very fragile democratic experiment, can survive based on that kind of obsession with cupidity, with love of money. And we've seen it spill over in the political sphere with our politicians. All colors. I get in trouble because when I talk about all of us, all right, when I focus on just one, who's black, all hell breaks loose. I say, wait a minute, it's trying to be morally consistent. And so the question becomes, what possibilities are there? And historically, we've seen you have to have what Henry David Thoreau, that wonderful epigraph, the wall, he says, got to do anything I can to wake up my neighbors from their sleepwalking. You have to have some awakening, some moral, spiritual, and political renaissance around non-market values, courage, love, justice, compassion, as well as sharp analysis. And I'm not telling anybody that just to be smart. We were talking about this today. Let the phone be smart. You got to be wise. The last thing I want to hear is how smart people are. I want to know what kind of courage, what kind of compassion, and what kind of wisdom do they have. So they have some sense of how to use their smartness. So that they're not just successful, but they're faithful to something bigger than them. And without that renaissance and renaissance, and one of the ways you get it is through discourse, through public discussions, everywhere you go. And you also do it through the music. That's why I spend a lot of time in the studios, especially with the hip-hop artists. And I'm talking about with the serious ones, the Lupe Fiascos and Talib Kweli, and Kendrick Lamar, and some of the others, or with the Timberells and the Anthony Hamilton, who really sold music, not just body-stimulating music, you see. And that's very important, because the kind of music that young people are crazy about says something about their spirituality. By spirituality, I'm talking about that, the quality of their integrity and decency and honesty. And if it's all just superficial bodily stimulation, then you're not going to produce the kind of folk to be courageous, to be Socratic, to be prophetic. And so, and it also entails hitting the streets if we go to jail. By example. A wonderful line in Com's Critique of Pure Reason, example is the go-kart of judgment. Example is the go-karter's judgment. You see different folk acting certain ways courageously. It then becomes contagious in terms of forcing you to reshape how you are judging things, evaluating things, and so forth. And I think right now we're just in a very early embryonic stage of trying to get the truth out because we have monstrous mendacity in corporate media. We have massive hypocrisy, not just of our politicians, but across the board. I mean, when I teach in prison, they tell me, Brother West, how many Wall Street executives gone to jail based on the crimes they committed, insider trading, market manipulation, fraudulent activity? But we got an influx every day. Poor folk going to jail. And they see how the criminal justice system is tilted against the poor and the weak and the vulnerable. It's wrong, it's morally obscene, and spiritually profane. How do you get that truth-telling and witness-bearing so that you can generate the possibility of an awakening? That in the end, of course, is a democratic awakening, small d, radical democratic awakening, small d. And it's what Martin Luther King was talking about when he shot him down. But that's why 72% of Americans disapproved of him and 55% of black people disapproved of Martin when he was shot. He was talking about organizing poor people of all colors. He was talking about critique of the American Empire in Vietnam. And if he was alive, he'd be talking about humanity, women, humanity, oppression, just brothers and sisters and transsexuals and so forth, because he wanted to be and would be morally consistent. And for me, that's a grand tradition to build on. I know I wish we had another hour.
Just one word about your question, and I agree with most of what Professor West has said here. I grew up in West Virginia, and Appalachia is now a land of hopeless hollows. It was never wealthy. It was, for the most part, poor. People like my grandfather's both were coal miners. One of them finally made it out of the mines and did a little business of his own. Were poor people. But things only began to get very much worse, ironically, when efforts at the national level, very well intentioned, were made to address Appalachian poverty, the Great Society programs and so forth. Recently, Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times columnist, visited Appalachia to look at the situation. Massive unemployment. And of course, the racial issue is not there because the minority population is just so small. This is an issue of white people. Kristof visited and he said, you know, as a liberal, it's hard for me to admit this, but these governmental programs that were introduced in the 60s and 70s have made the situation worse in many ways. All right, now, that's not a polemic against progressive programs. It's a plea to be thinking across party and ideological lines about how we can restore economic opportunity and mobility to those hopeless hollows. In the same way we ought to be thinking about how to restore mobility and hope to Detroit. The problems in our urban areas are very similar, and they're manifested in the same ways. Enormous percentage of out-of-wedlock births. Massive drug problem. Just substitute methamphetamine for cocaine or for crack cocaine. You got the same thing. Same effects, same consequences in Appalachia. Now, on the progressive side of the spectrum, I think the thrust of opinion, or the thrust of thought, is to think about the problem in terms of equality and inequality. And I understand that because the inequalities now are so massive. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, although it turns out that in adjusted dollars, those guys have a fraction of the net worth of John D. Rockefeller in the 19th century or Andrew Carnegie. A fraction. I mean, trivial. Still, let me encourage, just as a suggestion for those on the progressive side, to maybe, instead of thinking about it or framing it in terms of equality and inequality as such, economic inequality as such, think about it in terms of social mobility and economic opportunity. Worry not so much that at the end there won't be fabulously wealthy people, but just hope that at the end there won't be very many abjectly poor people, that people can be raised up by the opportunities that are made available to them. And if that becomes the issue, I don't see any reason standing in the way of conservatives and liberals getting together and arriving at agreed upon experiments, not conclusions. We should have learned by the 60s experience not to think we're going to actually reach conclusions or solve problems. But try some experiments to see what, in fact, will bring the kind of opportunity that's needed to the hopeless hollows or to the cities. There is less, on this social mobility question, there is less division of opinion, even in our polarized situation, than you would think if you just looked at the situation of the political parties and then looked at all sorts of other issues like abortion or the Obama health care plan or anything like that. There you have true polarization. People just disagree about that stuff, and there's not much room for them to meet in the middle. Mm-hmm. On social mobility and economic opportunity, there are ways to cooperate, to help poor people, which should really be the goal of all. I'm not asking progressives to abandon their belief in equality as an aim. I don't share it, but I understand it, and I don't hold contempt. I don't have it in contempt. But I know that progressives also care, as I do, about mobility. And if we can make that our focus, we can get somewhere, I think. Thank you.
I wish we had another hour or two. I'm pretty sure these guys can fill it. But thank you all for coming, and thanks to our guests.